Everybody talks about the middle class falling out, but what they don't talk about is what the average American's financial reality looks like. Some of this is better than it seems, some of it is worse. So today we're going to discuss.
The interesting thing is I actually think that it's been this kind of the same playbook since Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in the 70s, if you really think about it. I mean, because I remember growing up as a kid, there was one working parent. You could buy a home and, it was okay. You know what I mean? We were middle class, below middle class, whatever. But then somehow, that working parent started working more. And then the second parent started working, and then that second parent started working more. And then all of a sudden, things just got out of control. Just talk about inflation. But if you take a look, and you guys know I talk about my mom a lot. My mom's still alive, has a home that I grew up in, and that home was bought in the 60s for $10,700. And why is that important? Because my mom's a hairdresser. She's not a real estate investor. All she did was maintain that home. That's it. For however long. What is it? Gosh, what is that? That's like 70 years now, right? Like, can you imagine that? So that home is awesome. My mom still has it. And that home is now worth about $750,000. Okay. It's not because my mom was this incredible investor. It's not even because she even understood what was really going on. It's just the house kept going up. So why does a house keep going up? And that's kind of the question. And why that? And if you look at where most people's wealth is, it's what they own. And I think this is really important. Thank God my mom has that house, because now she's in an assisted care facility, and that house is paying for her, right? Because everything else that she's ever saved or done, and she worked her butt off, and so did my father, it's all in jeopardy, and the only thing left is that house. And it's really interesting when you see it like on a human level. And we look at this, we read stuff, we watch stuff, but when you actually see it and you walk into that nursing home where you've been in there, right?
It's assisted living, but
assisted living. I mean, the currency is health. That's the currency of that assisted living facility. And thankfully my mom has that. And I think everything I'm going to be talking about today just keeps going back to, it's not what you earn, it's what you own. I'm telling you guys, because I'm seeing it right now. I'm in my 60s. I'm seeing friends of mine that have made really, really poor choices. They bought stuff that's depreciated. They've rented their whole life, and they're in a situation where they're reliant on other people. It could be the government, could be friends, could be family, or whatever it might be. This is a eye-opening moment for you guys, especially if you're younger. Don't you agree?
Yeah, because what you don't talk about is everybody that's in the independent living facility, like that's not government funded. So they either have a house that's paying for it, or they sold their house and it's paying for it, or they have a family member that's paying for it. But those aren't free rides, like you need, and the assets generally are what keep you in there. And a lot of these nursing homes and different things take your house as the payment for you being able to stay in the nursing home like later in life. And the reason they do that is because they want the appreciating asset as well. And so, it just seems like now,
if you have one.
If you have one. So so it just seems like now, you hear people say like, oh, I don't want a house because it's too much work and I like to just be able to move around. But the truth is, it's not really about the house and owning and living in the house. It's about just owning the house and getting that appreciation from the house. And you could guess that inflation is going to remain higher than we've seen in the last decade, in the next decade. So hard assets are going to do well in times of inflation.
Yeah. And I think, guys, I get the savings piece, right? Like there's still this mantra of saving. But the reason that you should be saving is not to be earning. It's actually for safety. It's actually for reserves. It's actually for life interruptions and those kinds of things. That's why you save. Saving as a strategy to get ahead is a horrible idea, right? And Robert wrote about this in Rich Dad Poor Dad as well. savers are losers. And what he meant is that if you just look at what's going on with the economy and the inflation and the money printing and how in debt we are and all those things, it is going to continue. And so if you have savings, that should be for safety, for life adjustment issues. But if you have more than that, then you should be investing it at more than inflation. Let's just put it this way. If you're investing in making 5% on something, you're actually almost breaking even, because inflation's at 3 or 4%. And then, yes, that there's a little cushion there, but then you also have tax. You have tax on top of that. So, when you calculate tax on the interest that you might make on the 5% plus the inflation, it's a net. So you got to be north of 5% just to even move the needle financially for yourself. We haven't even tackled wage growth yet, and I'll tell you what. So, you guys are moving backwards. Like, this is happening right now, and we're at war. Where our interest payment on our debt is $1 trillion a year. And of course, there's all kinds of things that potentially could drive up inflation. And it's not this president or last president or the president before that. Just go back in history and you can see it's been president after president after president after president doing the exact same thing.
So let's look at the personal savings rates right now, because I think this is interesting. So pre-pandemic levels, the savings rates were relatively stable and they were between 7 and 8%. Now it's down to 2.6%. So they're not even saving $3 on $100.
Right. So when that money starts to circulate, then now that's when we saw that inflation hit. It got up to 9.1% in June of 2022. And that was a direct result of the money going to the people, going into the savings account like we just talked about, and then it being spent and circulating and pushing everything up. And then that is exactly what happened, why the Fed increased their interest rates. So if you want to blame somebody for the higher interest rates, blame the government for funding everybody during the pandemic, for creating the inflation, which created the higher.
So I have a question. Do you think that people are struggling now and only saving $3 on $100 because of inflation, or do you think it's their lifestyle? They're spending more money than they used to pre-2019.
I think it's a combination of both. One, I think it's the financial education. I think that and delayed gratification is for sure part of that. Things have gotten a lot more expensive, and I'm talking about basics. I mean, you can't go to fast food anymore for under $20, right?
I know.
And I don't eat a lot of fast food, but even us for the grocery store, that's a couple $100 each time we go. And I'm telling you, like things are creeping, and now we're heading into this summertime where we could have gas at an average of $6. I read something the other day and watched a video actually as well, where because of what's happening with the Straits of Hormuz, we could be sitting at like $6. So what does that mean? What that means is everything goes up. I mean, the cost of transport goods and services across the U.S., because it's all has to do with oil, what goes up. The cost of an airline ticket goes up. The cost of you taking a road trip somewhere goes up. Like, all these things, matter. And we're starting to see it in the used car market, oddly enough. I mean, the new cars demand destruction. When the new cars, it was in the Wall Street Journal this weekend, when new cars have gotten to $50,000, the consumer's like, enough. Even though their payments might be 84 months or 72 months, they're like, enough. And so what's happening? There's a massive, massive demand on the used car market right now.
Well, it's so crazy because even, our stepson's girlfriend is in the market for a used car and is having trouble finding anything to fit her $15,000 budget.
Yeah, that's insane. I had no idea, right? Because I haven't bought a car like that for a while, a long time. I used to, but I remember $1,000, $5,000 used to get you anything, right?
Right.
But all of a sudden,
15 grand. I mean, you could almost buy a new car for that, 10 years
yeah.
ago.
So anyway, not to keep jumping on cars, but the point is the average person is feeling it, right?
But I do think cars are a big deal because I think cars are something that people have to have in most cities. So it really does add to this middle class budget,
It's changing though.
people need
Like
it.
I know a lot of people, like the driver's licenses, people they're getting them at a lot older. Also, they're using Uber and Lyft and
Well, we know,
Waymo.
but I don't know if that's really cheaper. If you're Ubering around and Waymoing around, I'm not sure it's cheaper.
Yeah, it depends, I guess. I've seen people do it because of if you calculate insurance and gas and all the other stuff, and to your point, like if you've got these long trips, probably not. But if you're bopping around, if you live downtown in a city or in an area where the walkability is really, really high, and everything's a $10 to $20 Uber ride.
Well, we're seeing a lot of couples that just share a car now. Like we know multiple couples that just share a car. We're back in our day, like that was kind of unheard of, for a middle class family to only have one car. But I think, one of the bigger issues here is the emergency savings issue, because 42% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in their account.
I know, it's
and
insane.
2 in 5 Americans said a $400 issue they'd struggle to pay it.
Yeah, and we're also, I won't go too deep into this, but we're heading into a time where we just saw Meta lay off 10% of their workforce. AI is going to start tackling some of these lower jobs, and I think we're going to be rolling into this UBI, universal basic income, or some kind of.
We have to, right?
Yeah, I don't see how we can't. I mean,
or expansion of government jobs that could happen too.
Oh yeah, we need that. We need more government for sure.
It's basically the same thing. I mean, I always talk about my friend that works at the water department in Texas. Like, her
it's like a reverse Doge.
Yeah, like her, I mean, she has a job, but I mean, is it like super needed? Probably not. But she, it's a form of UBI. And if you look at other countries that don't have UBI, they usually have massive government
rather than
jobs.
just giving somebody, maybe you make them sit behind a desk and pretend like they're doing something at a water company.
Yeah,
something,
right? But I do think that you think about 400.
What do you do at a water company anyway? Like seriously. Like,
well,
I see how much you use this month.
By
the way, it's all AI.
Well, I know they tour the different water plants a lot. It's like a company field trip.
Yeah, but why? Okay, it's like a field trip. Wait a second. This is goofy.
No.
What's happening?
But listen, like it is its own form of UBI that is not called UBI.
Fair point, actually. Really, really excellent point. Yeah, these government jobs potentially could be a part of UBI, really.
Yeah. I mean, well, but truthfully, we have to do something, right? Because if the workforce is shrinking and people need money, you can't just tell them too bad. And people don't have the savings. So if we were to see any kind of job pullbacks now, like we did in 2008, people have a lot less savings than in 2008. So if 2 in 5 Americans or 42% of Americans can't handle $1,000 emergency, they definitely can't handle losing their job, for a week even. So you have to really look at that. And that's really concerning because, gosh, how many things are $400 or $1,000 now? Like just about everything, every appliance, everything that you do is going to at least run you $500. So it's a problem because people are really struggling to keep up.
Yeah, well, the country is going to have to take some action because they're going to be. You can't let people go homeless, and right now people are paycheck to paycheck, and trust me, guys, we got maybe a 2-year window where you're not going to have any rent issues at all, but then after that, the genie's out of the bottle. I'm telling you, you're going to have this massive rent growth at the same time where AI is kicking in. I'm going to make a prediction. 2028, you're going to see a lot of stuff go down because people are going to be in a precarious situation. Unemployment's going to be higher, and rents are going to start to rise. And
Yeah, and then so let's look at credit card debt, because on the other side of, other side of savings is debt. And so the average credit card bill right now is $6,500,
oh, geez,
which might not seem like a lot to some of
20%,
you.
right?
Well, correct, but the interest rates are right around 21% interest right now. So that alone on 6,500 is over $100 a month just in
It's
interest.
$100 a month.
Just in
And
interest.
most people are just paying that. So it's just like the government.
Well, but you have to look at all this, because this is your average American stats. But then you have to think at the end of this, people do need to retire. So right now we have boomers who are retiring, but they're kind of fine financially because they invested in assets. But then you're looking at the generation coming up that maybe hasn't invested in assets or won't be able to afford to. And it's like, how does all this debt and all of this stack up to then one day retiring?
Well, you got to kind of look at what retirement meant. I think the retirement age has moved, and the reason it's moved, and this has been, hasn't got a tremendous amount of press, but the retirement age has moved. It used to be 65. It was a financial calculation. It was based on money from Social Security and cost of living, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's long gone, right? That's a big deal. The cost of living adjustment, the COLA, I think they call it, for the Social Security payments are a big deal. So if it comes out at 1.5 or 2%, and inflation's at 4%, it's not keeping up.
You can't live on your retirement Social Security alone today, especially if you don't have a paid off house. It's basically impossible. So, and that's why you see a lot of older individuals working part-time, is because they're trying to make up for that difference.
Well, my mom has a paid off house and she has Social Security, and it was barely enough to pay for property tax and utilities and the groceries. And I'm telling you, it's not enough even if you own a home.
So it's interesting because, when you talk to your financial planner, they tell you need $1 million, or in my case, when I met with him, he told me $2 million in order to retire comfortably. But the average American right now has $45,000 saved for retirement. And even if you look at the boomers, who are generally doing better, they only have $185,000 saved. So there's good and bad to that. The good is, like, don't feel all the pressure to have $1 million, because most people don't. But the bad is that, 45 grand or even 185 grand isn't necessarily enough to retire on.
Yeah. So if you, just to put the math in place, if you have 45 grand and you're making 5% on that, it's basically about 2 grand
a year,
right? That's before tax, by the way.
Right.
So we're heading into this, this wall, right? And I'm telling you, the one thing, again, guys, I can't stress this is not about what you earn; it's about what you own. I just really, really want to pound that into you. This is about what you own, not about what you earn. And so you have to get into the ownership side of the equation, and that could be through, small things. You could start with an ounce of silver, for all I care. Honestly, an ounce of silver. It could, the just watch the metal market. You don't have to be a huge real estate investor, but you have to actually. I started giving away silver in our company maybe 10 years ago. And I remember I bought like thousands of ounces from this mint up in Washington state. And I want to say that I was somewhere in the $15-16 range, for what I paid. And I think silver is up in the 80s or 70s or 80s now. Now, it's been awesome. I've given away thousands of these things. And again, that is a lesson. That's a lesson. I've obviously been ahead of this curve a while. Gave each of my employees on their anniversary an ounce of silver. And I have some people that have, 10, 12 ounces of silver. Okay. 10 ounces of silver, times 10 is like $1,000. So, and that's something, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the hidden wealth story here, is that when you look at boomers, even though they might only have 100 and some thousand saved for retirement, they own their home. So that home is their hidden asset. That home can fund them into retirement, whether that's through a home equity line whether it's through it's not having a rent payment, whether it's through, like in your mom's situation, renting it out and living somewhere else, like they can fund your retirement. So those of you that are younger that don't own a home, you need to think of how can I think like a boomer because they've done really well. But also if you do own a home and maybe you don't have as much saved for retirement, just know like even boomers now, the average is 185 grand saved. It's not like people aren't sitting on piles of cash. Most people, they're sitting on piles of home equity. That's where they're sitting on.
Yeah. And that's always been that way, guys. Like obviously there's a higher percentage of people that really understand what they're doing on the stock market and trading and starting businesses and all that kind of stuff. I get that. That's not the masses. The masses, most of their money is going to be in a paid off home. And thankfully they have that.
And we talked to Graham Stephan about that. He's like, well, traditionally, if you would have invested in something else other than real estate, you would have made more money in something else other than real estate. But the problem is that you're assuming that people are going to take every mortgage payment that they're paying, and instead of just increasing their spending or sticking it in a savings account, they're going to invest it a certain way. And really with a home, you just get that natural home equity because you're just making those payments every month and the home's appreciating in value over time. So most Americans, as you can see from their cash, they didn't really do much with the savings. All they did was buy a home. I would say for most boomers, it was the single best financial decision that they made was buying their house. Like for your mom, it for sure was. For my parents, it for sure was.
Yeah. And the one thing about owning a hard asset like that, whether it's gold or a house or anything, you're not paying tax. These are not transactional things. These are long-term things that grow with inflation. Now you will at some point if you sell it, right? But there's even ways to do that. Like, in my case, my mom, we put a renter in there and the renter pays for her assisted care. And there's a threshold of income that she doesn't have to pay tax on because of her age, right? So it's really kind of cool. Also, here's a really important thing that I just thought of. Did you know that rental income does not negatively impact your Social Security?
Right. Correct.
Yes. Now think about what I'm just saying here, guys. Social Security payments are impacted if you're still working, but they're not impacted if you're getting rent revenue. Like, think about that loophole right there.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to block that out. Yeah. You can get it on top of that.
So my mom gets her Social Security, plus she gets rent, and she has to declare that, of course, the income from that. But because of her age, she doesn't pay any tax on that. So the combination of it, so in a way, she's kind of hedged her positions by renting her house.
Yeah, even if you're 62 and a half or 62 and a half, I think is when you can first start taking Social Security and you're getting rental income, it just doesn't count against it.
It's really an interesting point. And so because of those two things, she's able to live comfortably on her own where she wants. And of course, she's still got that $750,000 of equity sitting in her house.
Well, and we talk about the K-shaped economy a lot, right? Like ever since 2020, we've had this K-shaped economy, and it's heavily dependent on who owns assets, and when they bought the assets. But as you move into retirement, especially as the next generation, Gen X, and then especially millennials move into retirement, this K-shape is going to become even more clear because most boomers own their home. That's something that just most boomers do. Whereas you get into millennials and then you even get further to Gen Z, owning a home won't be the norm. It won't be the standard, especially for Gen Z. So you look at this K-shape and it's going to be really different, and it's all going to depend 90% of the time on who owns an asset and who doesn't, who's still renting in retirement and who's not. And that's who has their house paid off in retirement and who doesn't. And that is really it's just going to be a big difference between how two different people are able to retire.
Right. And obviously you guys want to be on the upside of the K, right? Not on the downside of the K. And that because and the point goes back to the very beginning when we were saying it's not what you earn, it's what you own. Because wage growth, as you guys know, is going to be stunted here because of AI. It already is stunted by AI. We're already starting to see little ticks, little signs, some of this unemployment as it starts to replace jobs. And the interesting thing is, I call this kind of the rise of the blue collar, right? Because you're not going to AI a plumber or an electrician or those kinds of the trades, but middle management, white collar, watch out! I'm telling you, it's coming.
So I like to always look at like real world examples when we talk about this, because sometimes I think we're over people's head. But like, think of your grandparents. Most people's grandparents were not wealthy, but they all probably owned a home, or most of them, and they didn't seem financially stressed, right? I mean, that's how my grandparents were. Like my grandmas, they both, their husbands died and they were on their own, and they were comfortable. They could get a car if they wanted to. They had a small home. They got their check every month and it was fine. But if you really think about the reason it was fine was because they didn't have a housing payment, and a lot of times they didn't have a car payment. So they really just had to worry about, food and maybe some money to go, play bingo or go on a trip here and there. They weren't, they didn't have all these big expenses. And so people kind of assume that's just how it's going to be for everybody, but things are really changing. And that's why it's so important, if you're younger, that you make sure you have some kind of hard asset that you can live in when you're older, but also will appreciate for you when you're older. I mean, these are huge things and big decisions, because you're probably not going to be, most people are not going to be able to save $1 or $2 million in cash. They're not going to be able to invest in the stock market and make $1 or $2 million. Some people will be able to, but the average person, if you're looking at your account right now and you're 40 years old and you have 45 grand in there, it's going to really be hard for you to get to $1 or $2 million. So you have to think, like, what other strategies do I have?
You have to. Yeah. And I tell you, I remember when you and I went up to visit my mom when she was still in her house. And, she was considering, because there's a lot. Upkeep of a home is a lot of work, right? And so, as we started looking around for places that she wanted to go to, we started digging into how she was eating. Mm-hmm. And I remember she was eating that crap from like a can. Like
she was eating fruit out of a can.
Yeah, and I was like, Mom, you can't, like, that has so much sugar in it. And her comment was, things have gotten really expensive. She's on Social Security. I've never had this conversation with her. I felt guilty, obviously, after knowing this. But she had a fixed income. And what she would do is she would go to the store and she would make different choices over a period of time. And eventually she started eating like crap, because usually, not always, but usually a lot of the stuff that she was eating was on sale, marked down, cheaper, or whatever. And I was like, what are you doing? So,
well, you didn't know.
I didn't know, but eventually when we moved her to the assisted facility that she picked, that all changed because she was eating better and all of that. But the point is that she had a fixed income and she was making do, but each time she would show up, things were more. Mm-hmm. Even, this is 10 years ago.
Right.
And so that's kind of the point, guys. Like, it's not what you earn, it's what you own. Mm-hmm. I can't emphasize that enough.